Right, so this is an ongoing issue that I think needs to be talked about more, and I'm going to talk about it. And it's something that's came up back in the news again now that the Women's World Cup just finished up, and there's the typical complaining that the women don't make nearly as much and blah blah blah. So this article is from the Federalist. I'm gonna go over some of it because if I went over some of it or all of it and gave commentary, I think it would take too long, and I think that's unnecessary. So I'm just gonna go over the parts that I think are the most important and give a little some comments. Um, so basically, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, gave a shout out to the U.S. women's soccer team. He took it upon himself to complain about how much less the female players get paid in numeric terms than their male counterparts. Um, and this is his quote: "The women make just as much of a sacrifice, put in just as much mental and physical energy, absorb just as much risk of injury than the men who play for our national team. Yet when they break it down, a women's soccer player earns a base salary of 3,600, and the men get 5,000." Now that is one of the most insane statements I think I've ever heard in my entire life, and the fact that that high ranking of a politician actually believes that is absolutely beyond me. And this is why. Basically, his reasoning for the fact that women should make as much is that they make just as much of a sacrifice and they put in just as much of an effort. First of all, they don't. They don't play as many games. I'm not sure exactly about soccer, but I know this, like hockey, for example, a sport I'm more familiar with. The players in the NHL play way more games than players in the NWHL or whatever the league is now. The travel's worse. I mean, there's checking in men's hockey, so it's much harder on the body. That, like I said, the travel's worse. They play a lot more. The season's a lot longer. So I'm not 100% sure about soccer, but I would bet money that they don't play as much as the women's soccer players don't play as much as the men. I know, especially in the European leagues, those guys are playing like 8 months out of the year. Like they have the league, they have the Champions League, they got the international play, they got all that stuff. But back to why this is so insane is that basically what he's saying is that, let's say I go to Jeff Bezos and get him to chart out approximately how much he worked from whenever the day he started Amazon to now, and if I went, turn around, started a business, put in the exact amount of work, the exact amount of effort, and then, whatever it is, 20, 30 years later, I don't know exactly how long ago it was he started Amazon. I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s. Actually, I think it was like the mid 90s. Um, but so if I go and turn around and put in that exact amount of work, does that mean that I should get the government or someone to give me $100 billion or whatever it is he's worth? No, that's insane. Like, and that's the argument he's saying that if I go up to some billionaire and I tell him, yeah, how much time and effort did you put into this, and then I go and put in that amount of time and effort, does that mean that I get $1 billion? That's not how it works. You have to put the time and effort in, and then you have to prove yourself to the market. All right, you don't like if I go and start a business that competes with Walmart, I don't just get to be worth as much as Walmart 20 or 30 years down the road, however long it would take. You have to prove yourself to the market, and that comes from a fundamental misunderstanding of economics by the left. They don't understand it like at all, in that to be successful in business or any of these, I mean, even in sports, these kind of things, you have to do two things. You have to put in the time and effort, and you have to prove yourself to the market. If the market doesn't believe that what you're doing is worth whatever it is you think it's worth, it doesn't matter. Okay, the market thinks that men's sports are worth paying $100 or $200 a ticket because it's the best of the best. For example, the U.S. women's soccer team lost a friendly, I think it was like a tune-up game kind of thing, to the U16 Dallas high school boy. I think it was the best high school or best U16 kids from Dallas, and they lost. These are 15, 16-year-olds that they're losing to. Another example would be in Canada. Every time the Olympics comes around in Canada, the U.S. or the Canadian women's hockey team, the national team, plays in the Alberta Midget AAA league, which is basically it's not the best. It would be um, if you took the top 20 or 30 player or the top 20 players in any given city, you'd probably take the top two or three of them away because they're playing at high level junior basically. So and the Canadian national women's team is comparable to not even the best uh, high school kids in towns of like 50, 60,000 people in Alberta. So we're talking some city that isn't even in the top 100 most populated cities in Canada, not like close to the best high school boys hockey players are just as good as the Canadian national women's team, which is one of the best teams in the world aside from the U.S. They're always the best too. So the idea that the skill level is anywhere close to comparable is just insane. But now that we've kind of dispelled that how much time and effort you put into something has absolutely nothing to do with how much it's worth. If that was the case, then we're literally talking about going towards a communist system, because the the market would have nothing to do with how much you make. It would have to be enforced at the point of a gun by the government, which is communism or fascism, whatever you want to call it. But um, I'm going to read a little more of this. Discrimination is staring us all in the face. These women who inspire our country with their poise, tenacity, and skill and excellence every time they take the field deserve to be fairly compensated. Well, then what you should be saying is that whatever league these women are playing in, I don't know if there's a pro women's soccer league in the U.S. or not. I have no idea, but what you need to be saying is that we should be going to these games. We should be buying the jerseys. We should be doing all that kind of stuff, because if you want them to be paid more, then what you do is you would go to their games, and the more people that would go to the games, the more they could charge for tickets, and so on and so forth. So if you want them to make money, then another thing that really bothers me about this, for people who disagree, their solution to this kind of stuff is always more government power. They want people to be forced to provide funding and money and all this kind of stuff. Is that even if you disagree with me, how in the world can your solution be, let's force people to pay these women more when they're not producing that much money? Again, it's the same as the minimum wage argument, all this stuff, is that if people aren't actually worth that much, then they're not worth that much. And if your solution to everything is to use force, because that's what would have to happen, they would have to force people to pay more for the women. And not only that, they probably have to take that out of a chunk of the men's salary. Like a lot of these, I know the NHL funds the women's hockey league. The NBA is basically keeping the WNBA going because they lose money all the time. So even if you disagree and you think that this is an issue, then there's two things that go to this. There's maybe you think it's an issue, you don't think it's an issue, but the solution to it is either let's convince people to start going to the games, let's advertise, let's get you and your friends to go to the games, even if it's just one every year. That's better than none. Or let's force people to pay this stuff. Like that, those are two very big differences that I think people need to understand too. This is actually a very good article too, if you want to go read it too, by the Federalist on the soccer pay gap. But I wanted to get to the other point down here, is towards the bottom, in that, yes, it's right here. The Women's World Cup generated $73 million, of which the players got 13% of the money. The 2010 Men's World Cup made $4 billion. Of that, 9% was paid to the players. So in other words, the women are making more, almost 50% more than the men. Okay, this isn't bias or discrimination in any way, shape, or form. If anything, it's bias for the women. All right, they're making more as a percentage of the amount of money made. Now, why people are complaining about this stuff, most of it is just virtue signaling, especially the male politicians, the Justin Trudeau's of the world, the Chuck Schumer is an example in this article. It's all just virtually virtue signaling. I don't even think a lot of these people believe in this stuff they're saying. They're just doing it for brownie points because nowadays women vote a little more often than men, and to get elected, on average, you need the support of women, which is why I think a lot of these politicians are talking about that kind of stuff. The other thing, too, that I don't know if I really mentioned yet is that if you support this kind of stuff and you support legislation against it, you're being sexist against men. There's no question about that because there is no pay gap between men and women. They're getting paid what they're worth. The women are getting paid more than the men. So if you're supporting this, you're supporting sexism against men. Because to fix this imaginary gap between men and women, you'd have to artificially pay women more, which means you're artificially paying men less. So you're being sexist against men, and that's something that, again, if you're doing what you're fighting against, in my eyes, you're a kind of a POS. But that's about it as far as this video goes. I don't think there's anything else that's too important to talk about and whatnot. But like I said, if you're really concerned about this kind of stuff and you want women to make more money, then go to their games. There's no one stopping you. If there was demand for 70, 80,000 people to go to a typical women's soccer game, these big stadiums would accommodate it, right? But there isn't. If there was demand for 20,000 people to go to a women's hockey game, I'm sure that all these big NHL arenas, they would accommodate that, right? But there isn't. And it's not because of sexism. I've never ever heard of someone say that they don't want to go to a women's hockey game just because they're women. I've never ever heard that. Or a hockey game. It's because the best of the best women's hockey players in the world are comparable to the best high school team in your a town of 50,000 people. Like that's saying something. And it's not that women are inferior or anything like that. It's just that these kind of people seem to think that the difference between men and women is like non-existent. They have this imaginary idea that everyone's the same, and they're not. There's a massive difference. So, like I said, check out this article. It's a pretty good article. And it's, like I said, this is something that really needs to be talked about because Canada, under Justin Trudeau, has gone full social justice warrior in this idea that women are oppressed and all this stuff. And I know I've talked about it before, but we need to talk about this until it's dispelled to the point to where 80-90% of the population understand that it's BS. A lot of people know that it's BS, but they're afraid to speak out about it because you're a sexist, but sexism is basically the only argument they have against you. So, like I said, this stuff it's a complete non-issue. I think most of the politicians who claim to care about this stuff are just virtue signaling. Most of the individual people you'll meet that care about this kind of stuff genuinely believe it, and those are the people that I think are the most dangerous. So you really need to educate the people, and that if they're saying that women should be getting paid more than they're currently paid, they don't understand economics by definition. And not only that, they're saying that we shouldn't even run society based off basic economic principles, because paying people artificially more than they're worth is one of the most it's a basic economic principle that paying people more than they're artificially worth is not a good thing to do. So I won't go any further. I'm going to keep it here. If you like the video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.